Did a worldwide flood actually happen? And if it did, what exactly does worldwide mean at the time that it was said? Because that could change the question entirely. I've done the math, and it's just really not adding up. No matter how you want to split it, there just does not seem to be enough water on the earth, in the earth, above the earth, in order to actually flood the entire planet, or at least not in the way that most people believe the event actually took place. Now, some people will hear that and assume that I am a non-believer, but that could not be further from the truth. I just don't think that this situation was as black and white as people imagine it. I think it was actually much more complex. This question is about precision. What exactly is meant when they say worldwide? Is that regional? Is that honestly worldwide? Or is that just the known world to them? Let me make this clear right off the bat. I am not mocking scripture in any way. I'm also not here to pretend that questions don't exist. If it is true, then it should be able to handle the scrutiny. So, the rules for this video are quite simple. I'm going to define the question first, and then I'm going to ask what type of evidence would we logically expect to see if this claim were true. And I'm going to separate three conversations that people keep mixing together. 1. Was there a flood? 2. Was it the flood that was depicted in scripture? Or 3. Does worldwide mean the entire world, or just the inhabited parts of it? It is important to distinguish these three questions because otherwise you're going to spend a large amount of time arguing with somebody else that thinks that they're talking about the same thing when in fact you're possibly talking about different events and are just calling it by the same name. From what I have seen, people generally get tossed into one of three categories. 1 is that it was all just a myth. The flood never actually happened, and possibly just a metaphor. 2 is that throughout history we have had large floods taking place all over, and that those stories eventually get combined to create the Great Flood story. Or 3, they actually do believe that the story took place because of their religious text or their traditions. When we read ancient texts, we generally like to push our own modern terminology on it, which could be very different than what the original people of that time had actually intended. In the ancient world, the world often meant where people migrated, traded, fought, lived, built cities. So if you are living in a river basin civilization and a flood comes and wipes out your towns, your fields, your food stores, your livestock, your roads and trade routes, and everyone you've ever known, that is the end of the world as they knew it. So the biggest question here is not spiritual, it's definitional. What exactly did the text mean at the time when it said, the world? The ocean covers about 140 million square miles of the Earth's surface. So when the sea levels rise, it's not like adding water to a pool. It's adding water to a surface that is so vast that it's hard to even imagine. Here are the key anchor numbers that you really just need to pay attention to. In order to raise the global sea levels by even 1 foot, you would need 26,500 cubic miles of water added on to the Earth's surface. That's 1 mile wide, 1 mile long, and 1 mile high of water 26,500 times for 1 foot. Those numbers are hard to imagine. Now let's scale this up to what most people think when they think of the worldwide flood, which is a flood that is covering the highest mountaintops, which would be Mount Everest at roughly 29,000 feet or 5.5 miles high. Now for this next part, you are going to see me read from the screen just because these numbers are just too big for my little mind to comprehend. If you raise sea levels up high enough to try to reach that height, the water required is extreme. 29,000 feet times 26,500 cubic miles per foot equals roughly 767 million cubic miles of additional water, or about 767 million cubic miles And here's the part that forces the question. The total volume of the Earth's water is roughly 321 million cubic miles. So a Mount Everest level flood would require 2.5 times the amount of water that already exists here on Earth. And then get that and add it to what we already have. And then you would have enough to cover Mount Everest. And it's just not adding up. So the question is, if it actually did happen, where did the water come from? And then, where did it all go? And this is the point. You can have a reset without having enough water to cover Mount Everest. If you lived in a civilization that was on the coast or a river system, and then the coastline shifts, or a tsunami hits, or the course of the river seems to change and drowns everything, that is world ending. Your maps are wrong, your fields covered in salt, trade routes destroyed, people scattered. This is how people get the mindset of before the flood and after the flood thinking. If the flood story was anchored in history, Mesopotamia would be a great candidate. It is literally a floodplain country. Excavations at sites such as Ur, I do hope I am pronouncing that correctly, have repeatedly come up with large layers of silt, which is an indicator of major flooding happening in that region. Across the region, flood deposits do show up, but they're not always at the same levels and they're not always at the same thickness, which would imply that there has been major flooding, but not all at the same time and not all as severe as the last. Mesopotamia sits between two major rivers, so flooding for them is not a rarity, it's just a way of life. So if there was a flood above all floods, so vast that it was able to wipe out cities and cause a restart, then that region is exactly where you would expect it to be remembered, recorded, and retold. So if survivors migrate, and the stories travel with them, you don't need a global flood to have a global story. All you need is the individuals that survive to travel with their trauma and pass it on and tell others what had happened. Flood traditions are not exclusive just to one faith. Mesopotamian flood stories such as the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Atrahasis, I believe it's called, but I probably butchered that. That also has a survivor from the flood narrative, similar to what you see in scripture. Then you also have the Sumerian Kings list, which contains a before the flood and after the flood framing. And if you've never looked into the Sumerian Kings list, you probably should. It's very interesting, especially when you look at how long some of these kings were said to have ruled. But you can find examples of these worldwide floods everywhere. You go to India, Greece, Norway, they're everywhere. Now, there are a few things that we should clarify. Just because a lot of these stories do sound similar and seem to be around the same time does not mean that we should automatically lump them all together and assume that it's talking about the same thing. That being said, just because we can't do that doesn't mean we shouldn't look into the fact that it is a possibility that all of these stories did take place at the same time. This is where a lot of people will overplay their card. They say such things as, many cultures have flood stories, therefore there must be one worldwide flood. And that way of thinking is just not logically sound. What it does prove is that human society has gone through enough traumatic flooding that it has become part of the identity of the people. And floods are the exact kind of event that survive oral tradition because they're traumatic as well as world changing. So when somebody tries to shut down your argument and say, well, other cultures confirm it, you just need to respond with, no, other cultures confirm that catastrophic flooding has happened. But the real question is, when they say worldwide, what exactly do they mean? In this section, I was going to bring up ice core samples and tree rings, but the more I look into it, the more I look into carbon dating, it's just something that it can't be really trusted. Layers get merged, they get lost, they get read incorrectly, or sometimes just erased. And it's not something that is practical, especially when you're trying to use a scientific method. It's It's not something that's tangible anymore. The worldwide version runs into immediate physical questions. Where did the water come from, and where did it go? But the world absolutely does have history of catastrophic flooding, of sea levels rising, and of regional mega disasters that have wiped out entire civilizations. Then if you look at all major cities around the world, they are all next to water, either rivers or by the coast. That's for trading reasons as well as just survival reasons. If there's water, it's generally a safer place to live. But when the water turns violent, that's when things can go very, very wrong, very, very quickly. Survivors also preserve their trauma inside of their stories. So what was once our whole world got destroyed is now the whole world got destroyed. So the question is not, was there a flood or was there not a flood? It's actually, what type of flood best fits the evidence that we have been provided with? A catastrophic flood event, or a cluster of massive regional events, did take place throughout our history. That part is real. And then it became worldwide through memory. In other words, the flood may be historically grounded, but the worldwide may mean the world as we knew it, not the entire world. If this framing is correct, then we should expect to see strong flood evidence concentrated in river basins and along the coast where people would have been living, where they would have had their civilizations. We should see flood deposits all across the regions that are catastrophic, not necessarily synchronizing it all into 1 year everywhere. People will argue on whether worldwide actually means the entire world or if it just means the known world at the time. Shared myths can spread through trade as well as culture. It doesn't just have to be through shared memory. If you bring up hypotheses such as the Black Sea or impact events, you have to present these as contested, not as scientific fact. Now let me answer the two comments that I already know are coming. Some will say you're leaning on man's wisdom, and no, I'm not. I'm asking what the claim requires. And if the truth is the truth, then someone asking questions about the math isn't going to make it crumble. And then there will be the ones that say, so you don't believe the flood happened? That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying if you look at the math of how much water exists here on Earth, the math does not line up with a worldwide flood. I'm also stating that if you have enough flooding in a certain amount of time in a certain region, you are going to have everybody there say that the world flooded, because that's all that they see, that's all that they know, especially at the time when you're seeing all of this water come in. Think about Tennessee. Do you think that they thought the world was kind of ending at that time? Especially when you have no communication with the outside world. You're automatically going to assume that everywhere is just as bad as this. And once again, in Tennessee, they were up in the mountains and places were getting flooded out. That's not normal. And that would seem to be world ending. So if you do disagree with me on any of this, then please provide evidence. But don't come at me with a straw man theory of what you think my faith is. Because most likely, you have no idea. The water math forces clarity. A recent worldwide flood just does not fit the physical evidence that we have. Catastrophic flooding is real in Earth's history, and regional massive events have been so severe that at the time they were worldwide and world-ending. So the responsible position would not be to pretend that the question is simple. What exactly happened? Where? And what definition, when we use the word worldwide, are we actually going to stick with? And which one fits the history as well as the text? If the flood tradition points to a real catastrophe, then the next question is unavoidable. Where did the water come from, and where did it go? And here's a follow-up question. What if the words, the water is above, isn't just poetic, but there actually is a firmament above us, just like it says in Scripture. A waters above us, waters below. If that is true, then the math completely changes. Reality changes. So if there is a dome above us, and it's filled up with water outside, then who can measure that besides the Most High himself? Just think on it.